Welcome everybody, and we're live with the call from Matthew from Canada, who's going to tell us all about this new frequency coming on the planet, this new resonance of the Earth, and how it's affecting us all, and weird things happen, right, Matthew? Welcome. How's Canada?
Canada's great. Canada's beautiful right now. Well, Canada's always beautiful, but overall, the topic is magnetism and our personal magnetism and frequency, the auras we extend beyond us, and how it interacts with people around us on the planet. And what Jason was referring to in terms of the Schumann resonance there is something that's quite interesting. And you know how synchronicities work, because the Schumann resonance has been up in the collective conversation this week, because typically when the Schumann resonance is a frequency of electromagnetic radiation that occurs between the surface of the Earth and the ionosphere, way up there. And when it first was measured, I think it was 1954, it was measured at 7.83 hertz, and it stayed at that constant 7.83 hertz for well, I'm not sure exactly how long it stayed in that sort of range, and overall it averages out in that range. But there's been these influences from solar flares in the sun that seem to be affecting it. And now the jury's still out in terms of the world of science about this, but many people who are empathic and very sensitive are noticing these differences and these shifts without necessarily knowing what's happening. So, you know, a couple of years ago, it hit about 36 hertz. So it was a jump from 7.83 hertz up to 36 hertz. And at 36 hertz, our bodies start to get stressed, right? Even though we're talking higher frequency, right? There was negative side effects are measured in people when they're subjected to those kinds of frequencies. Well, this recent week, it appears that this Schumann resonance has just been spiking at close to 90 hertz. So it's like, it's really spiking, and a lot of people on the planet are feeling it. A lot of people have been noticing things like feeling more fatigue, or a lot of the empaths that I know are just feeling wired and they don't know why, because there's this high energy streaming in towards them.
Yeah, I noticed that in class today, Matthew. There were quite a few ladies that were wired, weren't they, Gadine? I've noticed that the frequency has been wiring people out, like they've had 10 cups of coffee or something, you know?
Yeah. I'm on my first coffee and I'm okay right now, but we'll see how far it goes. Yeah, that's exactly it. It's like, and they're not necessarily able to understand why that is. And Rennie just typed in that people are having dreams, disturbing dreams. And so, people's dream states. I've had some very memorable dreams this week, not necessarily, in fact, mine were tended to be way more positive than I was useful, but used to. Useful. Ooh, there's a slip of the tongue. Way more than I was useful. That's a Freudian slip for healing there. So it's affecting people in many different ways, and also anxiety is coming up, and you know, it's like the stress field. It's like if the human body is just not necessarily used to these higher frequencies, and so there's an adjustment period. And anxiety very often can be this feeling like we are receiving downloads, so to speak. A lot of people talk about receiving downloads from the universe, and that's literally kind of what's happening. And so we can either give in to the fear and carry this anxiety around, or we can go deep into the healing that's coming up, bring peace within ourselves. And then what I'd love to discuss more as we go through this call today is just the collective of many people coming together in that state of peace, grounded and in tune and harmonized with each other and in harmony with nature. And so, you know, it starts first and foremost with our own personal magnetic field, the aura around us, and how we make a conscious effort to interact with others in our daily life. And so, you know, I'm sure there's people on this call here who see auras. They can see that in people. In fact, when I jumped on, I think Renee was just saying how she was seeing that in Jason. And guys, when I came on and you were talking about, had this topic even been breached that we were going to be talking about that, or was that just something that came into the conversation?
We just mentioned a little bit that it will be about auras and the earth resonance, and then Renee started to say, she started to say, what do you see auras, or how do you perceive auras? And I said, sometimes I see them in my inner eye, sometimes I see them around people, you know, in full, and sometimes I just see glimmers of them. And she said, well, I'm seeing pink with you, and that means unconditional love, which always fits in with the gene keys that fit with me, that you said it's the 25th gene key, which is unconditional love, right?
Well, I imagine a couple of your gene keys are up today, because the 15th gene key is the one we're in pulse-wise, and it is all about magnetism, which is why I was going to say that this whole thing about the Schumann resonance coming up this week is very interesting, because the 15th gene key is all about in harmony with nature and the Schumann resonance of the planet. So, you know, I think a lot of your gene keys, if you're coming from the gift of those today, it's like, whew, watch out, Jason's here, guys.
Yeah. Gadine's asking, what are Yankees?
Okay, yes. So yeah, so not everyone's familiar with that. So I know that a few of the people on the call here. So it's the gene keys. So it's a transmission that's based on it's based on the work of the I Ching. So, well, it has a lot of basis in the I Ching and astrology. It's the synthesis of information that speaks to our individual gifts that we bring into the world. And our profiles are based upon the time of our birth and the potential that exists within us at the time of this birth. And it does have a lot to do with the work we are willing to do on ourselves. And so it's the part of this recurring conversation that we're having. So a particular gene key, let's take this 15th gene key, which is in Jason's charts, and it's all about magnetism. It's at the lower frequency end of the spectrum. It's about dullness. It's about trying to escape from life. It's about escaping the ordinariness of life. And when we're escaping the ordinariness of life, then we're not fully integrating with it. We're not harmonizing with it. Whereas when we do start to harmonize with it, when we start to recognize both the mystical and the ordinary, and the mystical within the ordinary, then we begin to raise our frequency in this particular gene key. And the higher frequency of that gene key is magnetism, which is the conversation of today. And so that's the gift that we can bring out into the world. So everybody has a profile full of all these different gene keys, and it's based upon your birth time. And if anybody wants to know more about it, if that's enough to intrigue people, because we don't have to focus on it today.
Yeah, I've just put up the links to the Dutch Gene Keys site and the Gene Keys for English. They're in the chat. If anyone wants to look in that in their own time after the call, copy the links and look at them later. But going back to this call, what Matthew was saying is that the effect that the resonance of the Earth is having on us because of this frequency change, that people may be feeling more fatigue. I know I've been noticing it with me and Ursula, and I'm sure there must be other people here on the call or other people that have been noticing that they've been feeling this fatigue or needing to rest more, to recuperate more around this time as well. But that feeling wired or anxiety, yeah, there's a lot of people I've noticed that are wired and anxious, and that's coming up. And I think Renee mentioned something about dealing with past hurts and pain. And there is a lot coming up where you think, oh, hold on. It's because you're feeling fatigue, then old pains and old hurts come up anyway. And they're like, oh, hold on. I need to work on this now. I'm feeling more sensitive than normal. I'm sure Matthew will agree that in Canada that people are also noticing these old things that still need to be shifted, need old pains and old hurts as well. But yeah, it's like with the thing is, if about auras, right? When you meet someone that's positive and you get in contact with someone that's positive, you get a positive boost from it and you're like, whoa, that feels great. But when you meet someone that's not positive and they're feeling tired, then you get this like, oh, whoa, hold on a minute. That's different, right? And so what you have to be careful for is when you get this is quite funny, because when you get two oversensitive people in the same room together, and then they start talking about emotions, it can be that ping pong effect that Renee was talking about, where it's like, yeah, well, actually, I'm feeling anxious. No, I'm feeling anxious. No, and it can be a ping pong effect where an emotion or an idea, so it could say, I feel hurt, could be that the other one feels hurt, then the other one feels hurt, or the other one feels angry, and the other one feels angry, and they end up feeling each other's anger, and it's like a ping pong effect that can just go up and up and up and up. It can also be in a positive way as well. You get two people that are sensitive together and they're doing a healing or something, then or they're concentrating on a higher energy. It ends up getting higher and higher just because they're perceiving how high it is. So in a positive way, we can affect each other with our auras and energy, but also when in sensitivity, we can pick up these things, and it can work in a negative way as well. Have you experienced anything like that, Matthew?
No, I think I'm immune to that one. Yeah.
I'll just say,
yeah.
Tuesdays.
Yeah.
Must be the energy of Tuesdays.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. What did you call it? Terrible Tuesdays? No, it was
terrifying Tuesdays.
Terrifying Tuesdays.
Yeah.
And being terrified means we're going into our deep work, but sometimes we noticed that pattern, didn't we?
Yeah.
The one of the things I was going to ask you is, when you see auras, and maybe other people who see auras very close, I see auras, but not all the time. And I think, Jason, you were saying that you could get a hint of the colors too. And yet somebody like my wife can just see them very clearly around people, and I'm sure others do. And so I'd love to hear comments from other people in the group too, as to when you see auras, when you see people in those patterns of fracturedness, and they're angry or they're sad and things like that. What do you notice? Because I conceptualize what I would see and what I understand about it, but I'd be really interested to hear what people are seeing when they see the auras around people in these different states of being. What happens to the colors when they're in those lower frequencies, when they're in the shadow? What happens when they're in the heightened frequencies? Because I'm well aware of what happens with the magnetic fields, and I find that that's very interesting, because that's very measurable. And Jason, this is one of the first exercises you took the group through last October when we were at the Eco Village here in Canada. So you had the two dowsing rods. You were holding the two dowsing rods, right? And a group called the HeartMath Institute has studied this for a long time, but people have felt this intuitively too, is that you can hold two dowsing rods, which could be two coat hangers for all intents and purposes, and you can be walking towards somebody, and as you walk closer to that person, the dowsing rods begin to spread apart. And what happens is, and you could go and try this after the call if you wanted, or even during, you find somebody in your home and you ask them to think of a memory that makes them feel sad, that makes them feel angry, something that gets them into a lower state emotion. Walk towards them and see how far away you are from them when the coat hangers or the dowsing rods begin to separate. And then step back, have them then consciously step into a different frame of state of mind, something that makes them feel really happy, a memory that makes them feel really good, and have them step into that and own it and do the same thing. Walk towards them and watch what happens. If you haven't got the coat hangers, I mean, I'm sure we can tell what's going to happen on here without spoiling it for anybody. But really what's going to happen is you'll find that as people are in those negative states, those lower states of frequency, is that you can get almost right up to them before the dowsing rods will part. But when somebody is in a state of gratitude, we were seeing people, we were using quite a big room to do this exercise in last year in October. But what happens is it extends way, 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 way back. And so you could be 30 meters away from somebody, depending on how much they can project that, right? And when they can project that. And it's like the Heart Math Institute has measured this from a scientific perspective, and they've literally looked at the electromagnetic fields around the heart and how that extends out. And they find the same things that we find with these dowsing rod experiments. And so now imagine it's like, all we've got to do is get people to remind themselves of something, right? And so you can see the vast importance of being able to heal the memories of the past, because those memories, even though they might have happened 20 years ago, in the beingness of us in this moment, it's right here and right now. And in the right here and right now, that means that it could be something from 30 years ago could be affecting the field around us. And so there's so much room for that deep healing work. And the other thing that I just wanted to mention too is like how it benefits literally our DNA, because this is something else that they've done research around that has shown that when DNA is exposed to different kinds of emotions, it affects the expression of that DNA. And so when people are in states of sadness and states of guilt and states of anger, those kinds of things, it downgrades the expression of DNA. So it's like literally thinking of it from the gene keys. Every gene key is related to a particular chemical within the body. And so for the full expression of that chemical in the body, the gene key needs to be expressing itself fully to that potential too. And so when we are in states of gratitude, when we're in states of love, we raise the frequency of the DNA within our body, and therefore it expresses itself such that we pretty much create a new body-mind connection. We create a new body because the expression of the DNA is so different. So it really, this tie-in, not just to the field around us, but how it influences who we become over time. And so I find that very fascinating. And I saw Stephanie had a really good question. I'm going to let Jason answer.
Yeah, so what Matthew was saying about the us being able to influence our DNA coding, I mean, quantum physics has worked out that that is possible, right? They've worked out that everything's energy. And when you go down to the molecule structure, to the DNA structure, to the protons and the neutrons, and you go right on in, there's only space and energy. Like even mass is space and energy, right? And you know, and when you know that everything is space and energy, whether it's solid or not solid, then you can influence energy. And if you can influence your own aura, your own energy, just through emotion, then you can, being in a gratitude state, you can raise your frequency to a higher frequency. Not that you'll get invisible, but you can raise it to a higher frequency where you can be a higher frequency that is so good for DNA healing and self-healing, but also for healing for other people. And the more that you can raise your frequency and keep at it, you know, because it's like what Matthew said, being in your beingness is not something you wake up in the morning and say, I'm waking up, I'm going to be in my beingness today, and I'm just going to be in my beingness, I'm going to shine my light, and I'm in my beingness, which means in Dutch, gedin, in je zijn, in your, and if you're in your beingness, in your zijn, you're in that space of you don't need much to raise your frequency, give to or take away. It's like being in that unconditional love that we started this conversation with, that you're here to give. Of course it's nice to receive, but you're basically radiating out instead of having to need input from outside of yourself. Would you say that past life regression therapy would be important for this type of DNA healing? That's what Stephanie's asking. I do, to a certain extent. It's like when you go back into past lives, if we've had traumatic experiences in the past life, only in my own experience, I used to have a problem with my heart chakra opening, And in one of my lives, I had a sword in my heart chakra, which that's how I died. So obviously for me was that healing needed to take place energetically, right? That doesn't mean that it was physical with me. It was energetic, and when you do regression and you've seen something and you've been there, it doesn't need to influence you negatively. But some people I've noticed, and I've heard this just by someone else that actually does this hypnotherapy and regression with people. She said there was someone being affected by it even in this lifetime. And I said, well, if they go back and they just take the positive from that lifetime and that energy from the positive to the here and now, and cut whatever ties are to the negative, then they can live in the here and now. Would that make a difference on your DNA? It certainly wouldn't influence you. But when you think about just when you think about the impact that a trauma might have had in a past life, or the impact of a trauma that might have happened in this life, it's still trauma. But it will only affect you if you see yourself as you see it, as a problem that will affect you. If you see it as energy that can be shifted, then it can be shifted. So it will certainly help you on all levels, Stephanie. You mean raising your frequency and sitting in your power? Well, Renee, sitting in the power, right? But it's like it's a technique to get you out of your head, to get you into that space, to get you into the power of who you are and radiating that out, so that you can raise your frequency and communicate better with the spirit world. But it's similar to that. But when you're in, it is very similar to that. It's like when you're in your soul's essence of who you are, and you radiate that out into your body, and you radiate that out into your aura. Now you could use the power that you know, your light, shining your light in that way, as a help. But it's like when you're in that, it's like you're not in the mind, you're in a totally different consciousness. So you're in that beingness that Matthew was talking about. And when you're there, your frequency is higher because it's not being diluted by negative thought, and it's not being diluted by negative things. You know, it's like of course things happen in life that have an effect, but you can have more effect on life than life can have effect on you. And that's living from the soul potential. And that's also in my gene keys, by the way. It's one of my life's missions to help people live into their soul's potential, I believe, Matthew. But it's like, and it's when you can shift into that, it's like, it's not just sitting in the power, it's like living from that light. So it's like living from that consciousness. It's like all the wisdom that you've ever read in books about spirituality or whatever, your soul's already known it. You already knows the wisdom. It's already stored there. There is so much wisdom inside. I think you could probably say that everyone's got a book in them. It's just trusting and believing in that possibility within inside of yourself. And when you do believe in that, your frequency goes up. And we've measured it with dowsing rods. We've measured it in that way, and you can feel the energy. And obviously, people that can see auras can see it in the auras. And it's like, you know, it's possible. It's just a case of like shifting into that awareness and staying with it. So I think one of the best things I was told about the power and staying in the power and shining out was, why don't you just live from your soul's potential? So why don't you connect to it even in your daily life? And if you connect to it even in your daily life, you're always working from that soul's potential, not just when you're working with your mediumship, but how you connect to things and envision things within this lifetime. So I think that's answered that question, Matthew.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And like you just said there, it's like, because I've seen this in many clients. I've seen it in my own life too. It's like we can sit on a meditation mat, we can do our prayer work, we can do all these things that are spiritual practices in their time and place, and then suddenly it's like we meet the real world, so to speak, and then suddenly all of that can disappear. And what you're talking about there is that's being able to connect into that, because, you know, in a lot of ways, this real world can seem, and this is where this whole 15th gene key comes into it, with the shadow of dullness. Is like this whole world, in comparison to how we can feel in those bliss states, and in our work with angels and guides and things like that, this real world can seem quite mundane to people. And it can seem like, you know, we got to do our taxes, we got to live in this, you know, in this system that we're part of, and that kind of thing. And it's like, when we can really embrace that side of nature in this physicality, it's like when we can see that there's not, when we can get to that place where even the dull is not dull, then we can be truly magnetic. Because it's like, it's fine being magnetic when we're sitting on a meditation mat, but how magnetic are we when we're interacting with the world, right? When we're, you know, when we look at the different areas of life that can seem more mundane and more ordinary to us, right? Because really the shadow of dullness is about the fear of ordinariness, being ordinary Matthew, right? I've got a very ordinary name, Matthew Ashdown, right? And there's lots of people out there who've taken on these spiritual names to kind of, so that they move away from the ordinariness in a lot of ways. And it's like, and there's value in those spiritual names, and I recognize that too. And it's like, but when we can get to that place in this world where these things, like having conversations with people who like to talk about football and not about spirituality, or who are, you know, having working jobs and doing things that to us might seem mundane and boring, but it's accepting and recognizing the part it plays in all of nature, right? It's like, you know, because if we get into that space, then we can become so impatient with this world. And it's like, oh, people aren't waking up quick enough, and then it affects us, right? And it's like, but when we can be able to really accept it, we can stay in that place of our own magnetism, and that we can carry that magnetism out into the world, and touching others with it. Because we can, when we observe nature and look at the animals around us, like I stare out the window and I see goats, and those goats are eating all day. All day, their heads are down, eating grass. And to us humans, that could just feel like, what a life. But we don't know what's going on in their consciousness. For them, it's like, for one thing, it's they're fed, they're nourished. But what other kinds? Maybe it's connecting them with the magnetism of the earth, and so they're permanently meditating, right? And we're just not aware of that, because we look at it with these human eyes. And so I feel that is a big part for a lot of people who are walking a spiritual path, where it's like there's all these, we can do past life regressions, and we can go into an exciting lifetime, right? Where we were warriors and priestesses and all those things. And it's like Jason said, it's like, it's about bringing it back into this now moment. It's like, there you are sitting in your home or working in your office, and life just does not seem that same. How do we bridge that gap? Because when you bridge that, when you can bring that into those, then I feel like that's when we can carry our magnetism. And then we're not, like Jason said, we're not affected by the world around us, right? We could be working somewhere where it could be performing the same actions every day, right? We could be performing the same actions every day, but we can perform it with love. We can perform it with a sense of curiosity. You know, when we're interacting with people, we can be, it's like, how can we bring more of a change into every moment with this? How can we interact with the people in our lives differently? And all these different things help us to find the adventure again, right where we're at. And so I find life can become so much more exciting. That's how, you know, so many people actually don't even get into the process of doing meditation or prayer work, because to them that seems like, I'm just sitting still and doing nothing. We live in a world of just action, 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 but it's not coming from a place of intent or mindfulness. It's coming from a place of habits, that have been ingrained into us. And so I find that, you know, as we can just embrace all of nature, then that magnetism does begin to envelop our whole body. And then we can walk in the world in places that seem dark and boring to some minds, but it can be like full of fascination to our own consciousness. And that I find is a big part of it. It's like, yeah, it's great if we can find that sitting on the mat, interacting with our guides. How are we when we head out into the world? Because it's like that sole purpose you were talking about, Jason. It goes everywhere, right? We can carry it everywhere. Yeah. So I feel that's for sure a part of it.
Absolutely.
And what now we've spent time talking about us as individuals, I thought it'd be neat to kind of towards the end here, bringing up how it works when we interact with others too, right? When your field and your aura meets my field and my aura, it's like individually we might be these two separate beings at the level of the mind, but when we come together and those aura, suddenly it's like magnified beyond what each of us is doing individually.
Absolutely. Not only that, Matthew, but if we go into nature, then our auras get bigger automatically.
Yeah.
So when we say about connecting to
that's tuning in with the Schumann resonance. That's what you're doing there.
Exactly right. So it's like, when do you get tuned into nature? When you walk in it. When you're in your house, you might feel that you're not grounded. A lot of people with anxiety are people they're not very well grounded. And I'll say, walk into nature, and then you adjust to that frequency. Your aura will naturally get bigger without you even doing anything. How many times do you walk in nature and you feel better, right? They actually measured people's auras, and they measured it that it was needed. And there was a study also done in cities, that people that spent a lot of time in cities but didn't spend time in greenery or in parks, they were getting depressed and feeling depleted and not having enough energy. So they gave them time out, said go and walk in parks, go and do this and be around the greenery, and then they had more energy and they were feeling better. So it has a positive effect. So it's free as well. So just spend time connecting to nature and let it have an effect on you.
Can I just add something to that? You just reminded me of an example of somebody shared this with me. She's a woman who works very much in the world of environmentalism down in the States. Actually, she passed away recently. But when she was alive, she was telling me this story of how she worked in LA, and she was taking kids out from the ghettos in LA. And these were teenagers, 15, 16 years old. And she said she found it amazing. They'd grown up in this concrete jungle and they'd never been into nature. None of them had actually been into nature. And when they took them all out on this bus out into the hills of Malibu, when those kids put their bare feet on the ground, they began to break down and just cry and weep because they were suddenly reconnecting with nature. And it had huge shift in their life, huge shift. And it shifted her work such that they started to bring more gardens, more, forgetting the word right now, collective spaces for gardening into the city to help kids in that way after seeing that. So I just wanted to share that because it just added on it tied into what you were just sharing there.
It's so important, and they've noticed that study that they did on it as well, and you've been reminded of that. It's so important to connect with the earth's energy, whether you can just walk barefoot in your own garden or get out into nature. Renee says going out daily and connecting with trees is so healing. It is, because it's the nature of who we are. Like, living in these concrete houses and concrete spaces isn't normal, right? Not in the natural law, not in the natural way, not in the energetic way connected to the earth. And there are a lot of people that are not connected to that frequency, so they'll get anxious, they'll get phobias and stuff like that until they really, really connect again, and then they feel confident again. Before I go in about connecting auras together, there's a question about auras. Can it be learned? Stephanie, yes, it can be learned. Colors do have different meaning. You can read them. Renee was saying that my color was pink, and that means unconditional love, but it can also mean a lot of things. like depending what you feel into the color. Like pink can also mean someone that's been had a struggle in life, but they've had to learn through their sensitivity in life to reach that frequency, right? It can also mean people that like to enjoy a lot of movement, especially dance and that sort of thing. And every color has a different frequency, but also a different meaning. And there are different meanings that you could look out there, Stephanie, and think, oh, what does that mean? What does that mean? But what I would say is sit with the colors yourself, because this is what I ask my students to do when they come and learn from me, and see what they mean to you. Because if I take a navy blue can mean a lot of things. It can mean someone that's of service. It can mean someone that is someone that actually is of service, but is also very spiritual and is like a priest. It can also mean someone that is of service and is in the police force. It can also mean someone that served in the war. It can mean lots of different things, but also it can mean the communication of how you communicate. And if it's a crystal clear blue, it can mean that you've learned to speak your truth. If it's a bit musky and a bit, it's a bit dark and it's not quite clean, it can mean that someone has difficulty speaking their truth and speaking from their emotions. So, and it's the same with yellow as well. Yellow is someone that's very intelligent, and they're very good at factual, and they're very good at putting things in the right way. Normally people that work with computers and all that sort of thing. But if it's a musky yellow, it could mean someone that's getting forgetful. It can also mean someone that's having psychological problems or dementia. So it's just finding your own reference for each color. So I say, sit with the colors. I bought all the different colors, and I just sat with them and felt, what does that mean for me? And what does this mean for me? And what does that mean for me? And then you get your own reference of what colors mean. If you feel colors, it's just as good as seeing colors. That's all I can say to that. So as for the auras connecting with each other, the influence they can have is, well, actually, if I was to connect with Matthew now and hold Matthew in his gift, so I see Matthew for who he is with my aura and energy, Matthew is being held up in his gift. So the influence of my energy at the time would hold Matthew in the perfect frequency for him to grow and be nourished, right? And in respect and unconditional love, right? If Matthew was to do the same as well, he would have an effect on me as well, you see. And if we were to interact with each other in that way, right, positively, we could all consciously develop. And also, that's where emotional healing can take place, DNA healing can take place, other things can take place if we hold each other in their gifts. But what tends to happen when people do connect is there might be a little bit of jealousy, or there might be a little bit of the mind coming in and not feeling right about the person, or they said something I didn't like. That energy in your aura has a frequency and has an effect on how it is. I know there was also a study with like what you think about people actually changes the way they act, especially children. If you think, oh, that child's always hyperactive and there's always a problem, there's always that, and you think about children that way, that child will only act that way because you're sending out the energy to feed that child does that sort of action. But if you say, oh, I accept him the way he is, or her the way he is, and you hold them in the gifts of what they are good at, then they will change. Then the way they act, the way they will change. Many children that I found that are in lower frequencies and acting out and being not good at school, it's just because they have a deficiency of the energy of love. And when you give them love and understanding, they think, oh, somebody sees me, and they end up changing their behavior and their frequency. So the effect that we can have on people is hold them in their gifts and see people for who they truly are. Because how many times do we sit in judgment? And this is also in my gene keys, right? The judgment. But how many times do we sit in judgment of other people? Oh, I wouldn't do it that way. I don't know why they really annoy me. I don't know, we just don't connect, right? Instead of looking at what is that's triggering you to feel that way, is that something that you could clear? Is that something that you could change? And if you were to see that person objectively in their gift, how do they act then? Because there's many times in my lifetime I felt it, through my upbringing. It was a very strict upbringing. They're like, you've got to be a robot, right? And in that robotic upbringing, you cannot do very much. So what happens is you end up rebelling to having to fit into the box, right, as a child. And when you do that, you get graded. No, that's not good enough, right? And how many times do we grade our children? You've got to do better, because we try to be their coach instead of being their, unconditional. It's good. I support you. I'm holding you in your gift. Like, obviously when they come and trash your house, you've got to say, no, guys, you're not doing this. This is not on. But if your children, make a mistake, instead of going, they know they've made a mistake. So if you talk to them and you reach them in their gift and you say, I know you have a possibility to do this in a better way. I see you for who you are, and I hold you in your gift. That brings about change in a child. You give a child the energy of respect, then they will grow into that respect. You give them the energy of trust, they will earn that trust. But if every time you're grading them and say, I don't know if I can trust you, I don't know if you're mature enough, I don't know, then their energy is like that as well. And I know that's not our intention as parents. And I know this is not our intention with our peers, with people that we work with, but we do it because why? We've been learned to do it when we were at school. We've learned to do it all our lives. We learned it from our parents. We've learned it from preconditioning. And if we can step out of this preconditioning and step into that moment of, okay, this person is not the same as me. And maybe it doesn't resonate in a way, but if you can hold them in their gift and just say, okay, that's just where they are now. For you never know what's happened to that person before you meet them. You never know what their life has been like. You never know what's going on inside. You never know whether they're addicted to painkillers or whatever. You cannot see that on the outside. You cannot see the shadow in people. You can only see what they present to you. So instead of judging them from what they're presenting you, you can always step back and say, well, okay, what do I see here? What do I feel here? And what am I empathically picking up here? I see there's a lot coming up there in the thing. It's like, that's what I've been working on, letting go of judgment. Well, Renee, yeah, and it is, because if you're in that sensitivity where you think, I wish people would change, or I wish the world would change, or I wish, why is there so much things that are not right? Then we're in the wrong frequency. Like when we can step into the frequency of, okay, I accept that things are not right. I accept that people are not perfect, for I'm not perfect myself. So if I'm not perfect and they're not perfect, then we're all a work in progress. Then it releases that judgment, which is going to create disappointment anyway. I'm also learning to nurture myself and really love myself on a deeper level. That's great, because we always tend to look at ourselves and say, I'm not good enough, I should be this, I should be that, I could have done it better, instead of saying, no, I was the best I could be today. And it might not have been perfect, but who is perfect? What is perfection? For in the eyes of the spirit world and in the eyes of the great divine spirit, when they look down on us and they see us as an energy, and they see us as being perfect just the way we are. But we judge ourselves. So we sit in that self-judgment, which alters our frequency to more than we love ourselves more than we can give, and the same energy to love others around us. Exactly, Stephanie. Because if we can step out of that judgment of self and step into that acceptance of beingness, then we're gonna step into a new energy that's going to help not only change ourselves but change other people. For like, the biggest impression you can make on someone is saying, yeah, I see you, I understand. I'm going to pass it on to Matthew now, because I feel that Matthew's got something to say here.
Oh no, I was just liking what was going on. Is we talked about the intention of two people, two auras connecting,
Yeah.
and Renee and Stephanie have just gone and done that online while you were talking. It's
Yeah.
like they got their little conversation going.
You
which
see,
is great.
you see, and that's it, right? So if we were to look at the synchronicity of the energy, right, and this is like a collective talk, right, and we're connecting energetically, right, then we're holding each other in the perfect frequency as it is, right? For I hold Matthew in his highest gift, and I think, wow, that's the gift of knowing so much information, but also that gift of like, when Matthew gets into the flow, he brings through the flow of some like, I would say almost, it's like divine wisdom. And if I see Matthew like that, then he will always be able to do that. But if I see him as that being any less than that, then I would not be the best partner to work with Matthew at the moment. So, and it's the same way around. It's like with all of you. If we were to look at people and hold them in their gifts, we would help raise them. Just think about plants. If you give a plant love, it's going to grow. You give plant it's not, you tell a plant it's not good enough, it should be better, it should, I want to look at those sprouty roots, it will not grow. And that's the same as what we do with our energy when we connect every day with people with our auras, and what an effect it can have on DNA. Because if a plant can't grow, it's because of some outside effect that's happened in the DNA. And that's also been proven somewhere in quantum physics as well, that our life experience and what we come into contact with has an effect on our DNA. So if we're to grow together and we're to expand that together, then we should be looking at each other in the best and perfect way that we can see each other and hold each other in their gifts.
Yeah, and that's what drew me to the work of the Gene Keys, because it does help you to see that these shadows, like you used the example there of me with information, and at one level that can be the shadow of intellect, and not a lot of people think of necessarily as the intellect as shadow. In our world, the intellect is revered. In the world of science and so many other aspects, it's revered. It's people's ability to retain information, but what use is information for the planet unless that information is being used to guide the planet from a heart center, right? Yeah. And so to me, that's what you held me in there when you're talking about that, because the shadow is intellect and the gift is precision for that particular gene key. And precision is, I've got all this information and I could bore the pants off of everybody here by just reciting facts and things like that. But for me, it's like, it's got to come from the heart. If I'm sharing a piece of information, it's not to show you how clever I am. That was me in the past, right? That was the me that felt like I had to. I grew up in a family of PhDs, right? My dad had a PhD, my grandfather had a PhD. They were professors. And so it was like I felt that need to come from that. And that was that shadow. But it's the people who see me and have held me in that gift, like you said, that gift of precision, which is that just ability to tap into divine consciousness and
divine wisdom.
Divine wisdom. Right, divine wisdom. And that divine wisdom can say, hey, yeah, let's draw upon that information that Matthew learned. It's like spirit is going to use the vessel and the consciousness and the memories and things like that so that you can be of service to others. And in your serving others, we also become a great benefit to ourselves. And when Stephanie brought up what she brought up there, it ties into the gene key that we've been in all this week, actually. The shadow of that one is vanity, and the gift is discrimination. Now, just to explain those briefly, the vanity is where we see ourselves as separate from other people. And so we feel like we need to love only ourselves, right? And love of self is important, as Stephanie was sharing. It's like, because as we can love ourselves, we can love others more. And and also when, like Jason, you were saying, if we can love people with, it's not love them in spite of their flaws, but loving even their flaws, then we can see that in ourselves too. And
Absolutely.
that takes us into this the gift of discrimination. That's why another reason I love Richard Rudd's work with the Gene Keys is because he's somebody who's come from that kind of intellectual background and had to transcend it himself. And it's like, discrimination can tend to be a word. We discriminate against somebody, but this is discrimination. Actually, vanity is more of what that is. So the shadow is vanity. It's like, oh, I'm better than this person because I meditate. I'm better than this person because I'm a yogi. I'm better than this person. And that keeps us stuck in those lower frequencies. And we all have this, whether it's in our gene key chart or not, especially those of us doing spiritual work. It's actually the final kind of trap for spirituality. But the gift of discrimination is loving those things outside of us, loving the things in the world that bring us joy, loving the music, the art, the food, any of those kinds of things. Yeah. And the more of that we can find to love outside of ourselves, the more love that we contain within ourselves too. So it's really interesting that I love how this works, in that the conversations that we've had have just tied in naturally to these energies that have been influencing us this week. And now we can step out as we heal those wounds, as we transmute those shadows. Our magnetism evolves, our consciousness evolves, and we can't do that if we're caught up in the intellect. In fact, I've just seen this from Stephanie. I used to use my intellect to hide from my feelings. When you think of things logically, it could keep you feeling them. Exactly, right? Our brains can be so good at skipping through the feelings. A lot of times when I'm working with people, because I come from that myself, a very intellectual background, and I had to learn how to feel, that a lot of times when I'm working people, it's bringing them back into that feeling state, being able to see where their intellect tries to trick them into thinking it's already solved something. Oh, this past life experience meant this, or this meant that, right? It's like the intellect can grab onto that, but if we can just go into the feeling, we can go way deeper. And that's when we can get into the magnetism. That's when our auras expand, because we could say, oh, such and such happened in my life because of this. And then we get attached to that story. But what if there was something way deeper that happened in there? Ali says, my husband does that a lot. His brain is like a knowledge sponge. Yeah, everything he reads or hears, he remembers. I can ask him the stupidest question, he knows the answer. It can be intimidating at times, but I learn from him because of it. Yes. Yeah, it's it's like there's benefits to even those things, right? So any of the shadow states we talk about, it's like, it's not that they're wrong. They have their role, they have their place. I can remember numbers and faces, and it blows my mind sometimes when I can remember them. So there's those gifts in them. And then it's just about consciously coming from that place of feeling, allowing those higher states of feeling to guide our actions in the world. So as Jason said, being able to see the gift in people. And sometimes that's challenging when we see the shadow, because what that usually means is because we haven't healed that shadow within ourselves. So we can only see that. We can't see the gift that is through, because the gifts of the gene keys, or the gifts in life, come through the shadow, not around the shadow. It's like, if we want to find out what the gift of anxiety is, we go into the anxiety and we realize, oh my gosh, it was trying to show me that I'm getting all these intuitive downloads, right? If we want to get to the gift, if we want to understand what the gift is of vanity is it's showing us how to love the world around us as much as we love ourselves, more than we love ourselves. So all these shadow states that we see, like Jason said, it's taking the judgment off of them. And if we can take judgment off of them, if we can be observers of them, we become the light bearers in the world, and our auras continue to propagate. They extend further out, they interact. And when Jason and I cross thousands of miles, our auras connect. There's a connection there. And then we can affect other people. And then everybody who's on this call can carry their aura out and their magnetism out into the world. And we don't have to be intimidated by the intellects. We can still stay in that place of love and peace, and carry that out into the world. Because honestly, the intellect is only ever going to solve things that have already been solved. Creativity comes from those higher states of connection, soulful connection. So yeah, I feel we've covered a lot, and it's been really great having everybody contributing and adding their pieces to the conversation today. I'm sure you've got some more things to say, Jason, and maybe we could begin to tie up the call in a couple of minutes, though.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it was a good call. And what was good when we were talking about the energy that we can do to hold each other in our gifts, naturally in the conversation in chat, Renee and Stephanie were holding each other in their
Yeah,
gifts
I
and
know.
and understanding. And it just shows you how holding space for each other can really be a big thing, right? Um, I've worked with groups where people are all individual and they all want to get better, but they're not working together. And when I've worked with them, nobody gets ahead. But when I see the groups working together, supporting each other and holding them in their gifts, not judging them, the whole group grows and they go on a fast track to learning. Now, if we can do that with groups, just imagine what we can do with our communities. Just imagine what we can do with our schooling. Just imagine what we can do with this world. There are possibilities, but it's a case of thinking differently and looking at people's gifts and not looking at people. You know, of course you can look at what people are not good at, but look at their gifts. Because one thing, if I just take for instance, at school they say my son can't paint, so he's no good at art, so he's going to get a bad thing. Why did they even teach him it then? Why did they even try to teach him that? Because he was never going to be any good at it. So he goes away with the idea, I'm no good at art. I got a bad grade for art. And I said, it's okay. He's brilliant with mathematics, right? So it's like that's the gift, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we tend to always look, oh, yeah, you've got so much intellect, but you're not getting in touch with your feelings. That's not what we should be looking at. We should be looking at, okay, but you've got a lovely intellect there. And
Mm-hmm.
then once someone connects with you in that way, then you'll be able to see the feelings, you know?
Absolutely.
It's for when you can hold people in their gifts, then we have a real connection and not a connection that's like, oh, I'm just, giving you a little bit of chit chat today just to get along with you, you know? It's heartfelt and it's soul felt. And I think everyone can do it. So I think that
Amazing.
rounds it up, Matthew.
I just have one thing to show. I just have one thing to show, and it kind of stemmed back to the very beginning of the conversation. We were talking about visibility, and we are talking about raising frequency. And I've got a photograph here of something. This was a yoga master that I've learned Kriya Yoga from, and I was in his presence. Now I went down there, and I was thinking, oh my gosh, we're going to be there for 3 days, and I had some knee issues at that time, and I thought, how am I going to sit in the postures for 3 days on a mat? But I was able to, and there was just something about his presence. Like you could feel the magnetism when you're in the presence of somebody with that kind of magnetic being, then that's such a high frequency. It does affect our beingness, right? It brings out our beingness. It brings out our authenticity. But one of the things that I thought was fascinating was I saw a photograph when he'd taken a group to Mount Shasta in California, and somebody had taken a picture of him as he was going into his state of samadhi. Now, I don't know if he'd asked specifically for this. He's not the kind of person that demonstrates kind of things like this. But what I thought was interesting was this photograph here. And, I'm all for making sure things aren't tricks of the light or anything like that. But that guy doesn't have a head right now.
Yeah. Wow.
That's not a camera angle thing. That's not a light on the screen. And I don't. Hopefully, you can see it properly there. But it's like literally,
Frequency.
it's that frequency is raising so high that he's actually not becoming visible to the two cameras. And so, I'm wishing that for you for when you travel through security in Toronto.
I'm sure that'll be good. They'll look at me and they'll say, they'll look at my passport and they'll look at me and they'll look at my passport and look at, I don't recognize him. His face has gone and he's disappeared.
Yeah, yeah, there you go. Yeah.
You know? But yeah, so a great call. I want to thank everyone for coming. Thank you, Ali. Thank you, Gadine, Lee, Stephanie, and Renee that's just left. And thank you.
Yes, thanks everybody. That was great. Thanks for all your contributions and your shares. Always valuable.
We'll be putting it on YouTube, so feel free if you want to watch the rerun. And look forward to seeing you all next week.